Gentlemen, you've heard all the evidence. This was revenge. He fired the gun empty and then stopped to reload.
You strike me as a remorseless man, Mr. Dufresne. I hereby order you to serve 2 life sentences back to back.
The story begins inside Shawshank Prison during an early morning prisoner roll call. One by one, inmates step out of their cells and line up while guards count them. Everything seems normal until a guard notices that prisoner number 245, Andy Dufresne, never comes out. Angry, the guard walks toward Andy's cell and yells that he better be sick or dead. Better be sick or dead in there, I shit you not. But seconds later, the guard freezes in complete shock. Andy's cell is empty. The prison alarm immediately starts blaring across the entire building. Guards rush through the hallways while inmates wake up in confusion. Warden Norton storms into the cell furious and demands answers from everyone, especially Red, because Andy and Red were always together. But even Red has no idea what happened. In anger, the warden grabs a small rock from Andy's desk and throws it toward the wall. Instead of bouncing back, the rock tears straight through the poster hanging beside Andy's bed. Everyone suddenly goes silent. The guards slowly pull down the poster and discover a massive tunnel hidden behind it, a tunnel leading outside the prison walls. At that moment, Shawshank realizes the impossible has happened. A prisoner has escaped from one of the most secure prisons in America. Police officers search the entire area around the prison. Eventually, they discover an old prison uniform, a tiny rock hammer, and a broken sewage pipe outside. Nobody can understand how a man dug through solid concrete using something that small. And this is where the movie takes us back to the beginning. Years earlier, a banker named Andy Dufresne is sitting alone inside his car on a rainy night holding a gun. Earlier that evening, he discovered that his wife was having an affair with another man. Drunk and heartbroken, Andy drove to their house and considered killing them both. But before he could do anything, someone else murdered them first. Unfortunately for Andy, all the evidence points directly at him. During the trial, the prosecutor tears apart Andy's story piece by piece. Witnesses saw him outside the house. His gun matched the bullets used in the murder. He had argued with his wife. Everything makes him look guilty. Andy tries explaining that he never went through with it, but nobody believes him. The judge finally sentences him to 2 life sentences for double murder. Soon after, Andy is transported to Shawshank Prison alongside several new inmates. As the prison gates slowly open, the newcomers stare at the giant gray walls surrounding them. The guards immediately begin screaming orders while armed officers patrol every corner like soldiers guarding a battlefield. Inside the prison yard, older inmates gather around watching the new prisoners arrive. For them, this has become entertainment. They begin placing bets on which newcomer will break down crying first during the night. Most of them choose a fat, nervous prisoner who already looks terrified. But Red notices Andy standing quietly in the line without speaking to anyone. Something about Andy catches his attention, so Red bets on him instead. The new prisoners are stripped, searched, and thrown into their cells. Before lights out, Warden Norton introduces himself. He pretends to speak like a holy man while warning everyone that Shawshank has strict rules. Then Captain Hadley, the prison's most feared guard, steps forward threatening anyone who disobeys orders. That first night becomes a nightmare. The older prisoners begin shouting and mocking the newcomers from their cells. Eventually, the fat inmate completely loses control and starts crying loudly, begging to go home. His screams echo through the prison until Hadley storms into the cell block furious. He orders the man to shut up, but the terrified prisoner cannot stop crying. Hadley finally snaps. The guards drag the man out of his cell and brutally beat him while everyone listens in silence. The screams continue for several minutes before suddenly stopping. If I hear so much as a mouse fart in here the rest of the night, well, I'll visit the infirmary. That tub of shit there in the infirmary. The next morning, the inmates learn that the prisoner died from the beating. Nobody even remembers his name. But Red notices something strange. Throughout the entire night, Andy never made a sound. He just sat quietly inside his cell like he was somewhere else entirely. Over the next few weeks, Andy barely speaks to anyone. Most prisoners think he's weak because of how calm and educated he seems. But Red slowly becomes curious about him. Eventually, Andy approaches Red directly because he heard Red can smuggle items into the prison. Andy asks for a small rock hammer. At first, Red becomes suspicious because tools inside prison usually mean trouble. But when he finally sees how tiny the hammer is, he laughs. Digging through prison walls with it would take hundreds of years. Red agrees to get it for him. Not long later, Andy receives the hammer hidden inside a package. At the same time, Prison life becomes much worse for him. A violent gang inside Shawshank known as the Sisters begins targeting Andy constantly. Their leader, Boggs, becomes obsessed with him. Whenever they catch Andy alone, they beat and assault him. Andy fights back every single time, but the attacks continue for years, leaving him covered in bruises and injuries. Even through all of this, Andy never completely breaks. One day, several inmates, including Andy and Red, are selected for rooftop work repairing part of the prison. While the prisoners work under the hot sun, Captain Hadley complains to another guard about an inheritance he recently received from his dead brother. He's furious because taxes will take most of the money away. Andy overhears the conversation. Knowing finance is the only thing he still has power over, Andy carefully approaches Hadley and asks one dangerous question. "Mr. Hadley, do you trust your wife?" Hadley immediately grabs Andy and nearly throws him off the roof, thinking he's being mocked. The other prisoners freeze in fear because everyone knows Hadley kills inmates without hesitation. But Andy quickly explains that the money can legally be transferred to Hadley's wife as a tax-free gift, allowing him to keep almost all of it. Hadley slowly realizes Andy is telling the truth. In exchange for helping with the paperwork, Andy asks for only one thing: cold beers for the prisoners working on the roof. A few days later, the prisoners sit together on the rooftop drinking beer under the sunlight like free men for the first time in years. Andy doesn't drink himself. Instead, he quietly watches the others enjoying the moment while smiling to himself. From that day forward, the inmates begin respecting him. Even Red finally realizes that Andy Dufresne is very different from everyone else inside Shawshank Prison. After the rooftop incident, Andy slowly becomes one of the most respected inmates in Shawshank. Guards begin coming to him for financial advice, tax forms, and paperwork because they realize he's smarter than most lawyers outside prison. Even Captain Hadley, the same brutal guard who nearly threw him off the roof, now treats him differently. Meanwhile, Red notices that Andy has changed too. For the first time since arriving at Shawshank, Andy actually talks more, jokes occasionally, and spends time with the other prisoners during meals. It almost feels like he's finally adapting to prison life. But the attacks from the Sisters still continue. One night, Boggs and his gang corner Andy again inside the prison laundry room. Andy fights back harder than ever before, refusing to submit to them. Furious, the gang brutally beats him nearly to death. Andy ends up in the infirmary for over a month, barely able to move. This time, however, things turn out differently. When Boggs is released from solitary confinement after the attack, Captain Hadley hears what happened to Andy. Since Andy now handles financial matters for many guards, Hadley sees him as useful. Without warning, Hadley and several guards drag Boggs away and beat him so severely that he becomes permanently crippled. From that moment onward, the Sisters never touch Andy again. After recovering from his injuries, Andy returns to his cell and finds a large Rita Hayworth poster waiting for him from Red. Andy thanks him casually and hangs it neatly on the wall beside his bed. Not long later, Warden Norton personally visits Andy's cell for inspection. Unlike the other guards, Norton acts calm and religious, constantly quoting the Bible while pretending to be a righteous man. He notices Andy reading a Bible in his cell and approves of it immediately. Then his eyes drift toward the Rita Hayworth poster. Posters are technically forbidden inside Shawshank, but Norton surprisingly allows Andy to keep it. Before leaving, he hands Andy the Bible and tells him something that later becomes unforgettable. Salvation lies within. Soon after, Andy receives a new prison assignment. Instead of hard labor, he is transferred to work inside the prison library alongside an elderly inmate named Brooks, a man who has spent almost his entire life inside Shawshank. At first, the library is tiny and outdated. Most prisoners don't even bother visiting because there's barely anything useful there. But Andy immediately starts trying to improve it. Every single week, he writes letters to the state senate asking for funds, books, and supplies to expand the library. The prison administration completely ignores him. Still, Andy continues writing letter after letter every week without stopping. Meanwhile, his reputation keeps growing across the prison. Guards from different blocks line up for financial advice. Andy helps them with taxes, investments, insurance, and savings. Eventually, even Warden Norton secretly uses Andy to help launder illegal money earned through prison labor contracts. Norton creates a system where prisoners work outside Shawshank for almost no pay while he pockets huge profits. Since the money is illegal, Andy creates fake bank accounts under the identity of a made-up person named Randall Stevens. On paper, Randall Stevens looks completely real with signatures, identification, and financial records. In reality, he doesn't exist. Years begin passing quickly inside Shawshank. Then one day, something unexpected happens. Brooks suddenly grabs another inmate and holds a knife to his throat inside the library. Guards rush in while everyone panics. But Brooks starts crying hysterically, saying he doesn't want to leave prison. The inmates finally learn the truth. After spending 50 years inside Shawshank, Brooks has been approved for parole. Instead of feeling happy, Brooks is terrified. Prison has become the only life he understands. Outside Shawshank, he has no family, no friends, and no idea how the modern world works anymore. Red explains to Andy that Brooks has become institutionalized. After living inside prison walls for so long, freedom itself now scares him more than prison. Eventually, Brooks is released anyway. For the first time in decades, he walks through busy streets filled with cars, crowds, and noise that feel completely unfamiliar to him. He struggles badly adjusting to normal life. He gets a small apartment and a grocery store job, but everything feels overwhelming and lonely. Every night he thinks about Shawshank. The outside world feels colder than prison ever did. Finally, unable to handle the loneliness anymore, Brooks hangs himself inside his apartment after carving the words "Brooks was here" into the wooden ceiling beam. Back inside Shawshank, the prisoners receive the heartbreaking news. Andy quietly thinks about Brooks for a long time. Around this same period, Andy's endless letters finally pay off. The state senate sends him several boxes of books, records, and a small amount of money for the library. Most people would have stopped there, but Andy immediately decides to write even more letters asking for additional funding. One afternoon, while sorting through donated records, Andy finds a classical opera recording. An idea suddenly forms in his head. While working inside the warden's office, Andy locks the door and places the record onto the loudspeaker system connected throughout Shawshank Prison. Then he plays the music at full volume. Beautiful opera music suddenly echoes across every hallway, cell, and prison yard. The inmates freeze in disbelief. Even the guards stop moving. For a brief moment, the entire prison feels different. The walls, bars, and cages almost disappear as every prisoner quietly listens to something pure and beautiful that reminds them freedom still exists somewhere outside. Nobody inside Shawshank understands the words being sung, but somehow, everyone understands the feeling. Eventually, the guards break into the office and drag Andy away. As punishment, Warden Norton throws him into solitary confinement for 2 entire weeks. When Andy finally returns, Red asks him if the punishment was really worth it just for a few minutes of music. Andy smiles calmly and says there are certain things prison can never take away from a man. One of those things is hope. Red disagrees immediately. To Red, hope inside Shawshank is dangerous because it only drives prisoners insane. After spending decades behind bars and repeatedly getting denied parole, Red believes hope only leads to disappointment. But Andy never changes his mindset. No matter how brutal Shawshank becomes, Andy Dufresne continues believing that someday he will walk out of that prison a free man. Years continue passing inside Shawshank Prison, and Andy slowly transforms the library into the best part of the entire prison. New books arrive constantly, shelves expand, and inmates who once spent all day fighting or gambling now sit quietly reading novels and studying for exams. Andy even starts teaching prisoners basic education classes so they can earn diplomas before leaving prison someday. For the first time in years, some inmates actually begin believing they might still have a future outside those walls. At the same time, Warden Norton becomes richer than ever. Using cheap prison labor, he wins construction contracts all across the state because no company can compete with workers who are practically free. The prisoners do all the work while Norton secretly collects massive profits behind the scenes. And the person handling all the dirty money is Andy. Using his banking knowledge, Andy launders thousands of dollars through fake accounts created under the identity of Randall Stevens, a person who exists only on paper. Andy even creates fake signatures, tax forms, and identification documents so perfectly that nobody could ever suspect the truth. Norton trusts Andy completely now. But what Norton doesn't realize is that Andy quietly keeps copies of every financial record. Then in 1965, Shawshank receives another new batch of inmates. Among them is a young, energetic prisoner named Tommy Williams. Unlike most inmates, Tommy is loud, funny, and constantly talking. He quickly becomes friends with Red and the others, bringing fresh energy into the prison after years of depressing routine. Tommy eventually starts spending time with Andy inside the library. Since Tommy never finished school, Andy offers to help him study for his diploma exams. At first, Tommy jokes around and doesn't take the lesson seriously, but over time he genuinely starts trying. For the first time in his life, somebody actually believes he can become better. One night, while talking with Red and Andy, Tommy suddenly mentions something shocking. Years earlier inside another prison, Tommy shared a cell with a dangerous criminal who bragged about committing a double murder during a robbery. According to the criminal, he broke into a rich banker's house and killed both the banker's wife and her lover after they woke up unexpectedly. Then he laughed about how the husband got blamed for everything. The moment Tommy finishes the story, Andy freezes completely, because every single detail matches the murder case that sent him to Shawshank. For nearly 20 years, Andy has lived as an innocent man behind bars. And now, for the first time, he finally has proof that could clear his name. The next morning, Andy rushes directly to Warden Norton and explains everything. He begs Norton to reopen the investigation and contact the proper authorities. At first, Norton pretends not to care, but deep down, he becomes terrified. If Andy gets released, the entire money laundering operation could collapse. Andy knows every illegal secret tied to Norton's fortune. He knows about the fake accounts, the corruption, the stolen money, everything. Norton cannot allow Andy to leave Shawshank alive. Still hoping for justice, Andy insists Tommy can testify and expose the real killer. Norton calmly tells him the courts would never believe a criminal story after so many years. Andy becomes furious. For the first time in the movie, he completely loses control and screams at Norton, accusing him of trapping an innocent man inside prison for profit. Norton's expression instantly changes. Without another word, he orders guards to drag Andy into solitary confinement. A few days later, Norton secretly calls Tommy outside into the prison yard late at night. He asks Tommy if the story about the real killer is actually true. Tommy nervously confirms everything. The young inmate believes the warden truly wants to help Andy. Then Norton casually steps aside and signals a guard standing above with a rifle. Seconds later, Tommy is shot multiple times and collapses dead in the dirt. The guards later claim Tommy was trying to escape, but everyone inside Shawshank knows the truth. Tommy was murdered to keep Andy silent forever. Afterwards, Norton visits Andy in solitary confinement and calmly tells him that Tommy died during an escape attempt. Andy immediately realizes what really happened. Completely devastated, Andy refuses to continue laundering money for Norton anymore. But Norton reminds him that inside Shawshank, he controls everything. If Andy refuses, the library will be shut down permanently, prisoners will lose their education programs, and Andy himself will spend the rest of his life suffering inside solitary confinement. A month later, Andy is finally released from solitary. When he walks back into the prison yard, Red notices something different about him. Andy looks exhausted, quieter, almost emotionally broken. That night, Andy sits beside Red and begins talking about a place in Mexico called Zaguataneo. He describes it as a peaceful town beside the ocean where nobody asks questions and a man can finally live freely without remembering his past. Andy dreams about opening a small hotel there and fixing old fishing boats near the beach. Then he looks directly at Red and says he hopes someday Red will join him there. But Red quickly shuts the idea down. After spending most of his life inside prison, Red no longer believes in dreams. To him, hope is dangerous because it makes disappointment even more painful. Andy simply smiles and says one of the most important lines in the entire story: "Get busy living or get busy dying." Before leaving, Andy gives Red strange instructions. He tells him that if he ever gets released from prison, he should travel to a field near Buxton. There, beneath a large oak tree beside a stone wall, Andy has hidden something important for him. Red becomes confused by how serious Andy suddenly sounds. Then things become even stranger. Later that night, another inmate tells Red that Andy recently asked him for a long piece of rope. Red immediately panics. After everything Andy has suffered, the false conviction, the years of abuse, Tommy's murder, and solitary confinement, Red fears his best friend is finally planning to kill himself. That night becomes the longest night of Red's life. Outside, thunder crashes across the sky while heavy rain pours down over Shawshank Prison. And inside his cell, Andy Dufresne quietly prepares for the impossible. The next morning, the guards open every prison cell for roll call. One by one, inmates walk out into the hallway. But Andy never appears. At first, nobody thinks much of it. Red assumes his friend is still asleep after the emotional breakdown he seemed to have the night before. An angry guard walks toward Andy's cell shouting for him to get up. But the moment he looks inside, he freezes completely. The cell is empty. Within seconds, alarms begin echoing across the entire prison. For the first time in Shawshank history, a prisoner has disappeared. Warden Norton rushes toward the cell in disbelief while guards search every corner of the prison. Red is immediately dragged into the room because everyone knows he was Andy's closest friend. Norton demands answers, but Red genuinely has no idea what happened. The warden becomes furious and starts throwing objects around the room in rage. Then suddenly, one of the rocks smashes directly through the poster hanging on Andy's wall. Everyone stops moving. Norton slowly walks toward the torn poster and pulls it away. Behind it is a massive tunnel carved deep into the concrete wall. The guards stare in complete shock. For nearly 20 years, Andy had secretly been digging through solid prison walls using nothing but the tiny rock hammer Red smuggled in for him decades earlier. The impossible escape suddenly becomes real. The tunnel stretches far behind the wall until it reaches a sewage pipe underneath the prison. The guards immediately begin searching outside while Norton continues standing there speechless, finally realizing Andy had been planning this for almost his entire prison sentence. Then the movie reveals how everything happened. The night before, after returning from the warden's office, Andy carefully placed Norton's financial records and evidence into a plastic bag. He also secretly switched shoes with the warden, wearing Norton's polished leather shoes instead of his prison boots. Then, while thunder shook the sky outside, Andy removed the poster and climbed through the tunnel he had spent nearly 20 years digging. Every single handful of concrete he chipped from the wall over the years had been hidden inside his pockets and scattered little by little around the prison yard during daily walks. Nobody ever noticed. For 2 decades, Andy slowly carved his way to freedom right under everyone's noses. Once he reached the sewage pipe, he used a large rock to repeatedly smash through the rusted metal line. The thunderstorm outside covered the sound perfectly. Finally, after countless hits, the pipe bursts open, and Andy crawls inside. The tunnel is disgusting beyond imagination. For almost half a mile, Andy crawls through human waste, sewage water, and filth in total darkness. He vomits repeatedly, but keeps moving forward because after 19 years inside Shawshank, freedom is finally waiting on the other side. Then at last, Andy reaches the end. He tears open the final pipe and falls into a river outside the prison walls. For the first time in decades, Andy Dufresne is free. He stands in the pouring rain with his arms spread wide toward the sky while thunder crashes above him. The rain washes away every trace of prison filth from his body like he's being reborn. But Andy isn't finished yet. The next morning, a man named Randall Stevens suddenly appears at several different banks. Since Randall Stevens officially exists on paper with signatures, identification, and legal documents created by Andy over the years, nobody suspects anything. Andy calmly withdraws every dollar from the warden's secret accounts. Over $370,000 disappears in a single day. Then he mails all the evidence of Norton's corruption, money laundering, illegal prison labor, and murders directly to newspapers and government authorities. Back at Shawshank, Warden Norton confidently walks toward his office safe, believing his evidence is still secure. But when he opens the safe, he finds only Andy's Bible sitting inside. Confused, Norton opens it. Inside the pages is a perfectly carved hollow space where Andy hid the rock hammer all those years. Then Norton sees a message Andy left behind. "Dear Warden, you were right. Salvation lay within." At that exact moment, police cars begin flooding towards Shawshank Prison. The newspapers have already exposed everything. Captain Hadley is arrested for murder. Government agents storm the prison. And Warden Norton finally realizes his entire empire has collapsed overnight because of the quiet banker he underestimated for 20 years. Knowing prison now awaits him instead, Norton locks himself inside his office. Moments later, a gunshot echoes from Shawshank Prison. The corrupt warden is dead. Meanwhile, far away from Shawshank, Andy finally arrives in Mexico. For the first time in his life, nobody is watching him, nobody controls him, and nobody can cage him ever again. Sometime later, Red receives a postcard with no return address. The postcard simply shows a beautiful beach in Mexico. The moment Red sees it, he immediately understands. Andy survived. His friend truly escaped Shawshank and reached the place he always dreamed about. For the first time in years, Red smiles like a free man. Inside the prison, Andy's escape becomes legendary. Every inmate talks about the banker who disappeared through solid concrete walls using nothing but a tiny rock hammer. Even the guards can barely believe it happened. Years continue passing. Eventually, Red appears before the parole board once again after spending nearly 40 years in prison. Unlike before, he no longer tries to impress anyone. He no longer repeats fake speeches about rehabilitation. This time, Red simply tells the truth. He admits he regrets the crime he committed when he was young. Not because the parole board wants him to say it, but because he genuinely regrets becoming the foolish young man who destroyed another person's life. The parole board silently listens. For the first time in decades, Red speaks honestly without fear. Then finally, after 40 years behind bars, the board approves his parole. Red slowly walks out of Shawshank Prison carrying only a small bag. The giant prison gates close behind him forever. But freedom no longer feels exciting. It feels terrifying. The outside world has changed too much. Cars move faster. Buildings are taller. People live differently. Red feels exactly like Brooks once did. Lost, confused, institutionalized. He gets assigned a tiny apartment and starts working at a grocery store bagging food for customers. Every time he wants to use the bathroom, he instinctively asks permission from his manager like he's still in prison. At night, Red sits alone thinking about Shawshank, thinking about Brooks, thinking about Andy. Sometimes the loneliness becomes so overwhelming that Red considers committing another crime just to return to prison where life feels familiar. But then he remembers the promise he made to Andy. So one day, Red finally decides to take a risk. He violates his parole and travels to the location Andy described years earlier. After a long journey, Red arrives at a massive hayfield with a tall oak tree standing beside a stone wall. He slowly walks toward it. Then underneath a black volcanic rock, Red discovers a small hidden box. Inside is money, and a letter from Andy. In the letter, Andy tells Red that if he came this far, maybe he can come a little farther. Andy asks Red to join him in Mexico because he needs a friend there. Then Andy repeats the words Red once mocked years ago inside prison. Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things. Reading the letter changes something inside Red completely. For the first time in his life, he finally chooses hope over fear. Soon afterward, Red crosses the border into Mexico despite violating parole. As the bus moves farther away from America, Red feels nervous but also strangely alive. Then finally, he arrives at a beautiful beach beside the ocean. The water is bright blue. The sky is endless. And standing near an old fishing boat is Andy Dufresne himself. Andy looks up and sees his old friend walking toward him. After decades of prison walls, suffering, beatings, corruption, and hopelessness, the two friends finally reunite as free men beside the ocean Andy dreamed about for nearly 20 years. And for the first time since entering Shawshank Prison, both men are finally free.